So here's an outline of how superpowers are developed as per the Yoga Sutras. This is my understanding of it. I'm not repeating the words of the Yoga Sutras. So having gone through the earlier process of yoga, it's an 8-stage process that is described in the Yoga Sutra. So having gone through the first 5 stages, the awareness is able to understand the frame in which it exists. That is the mathematical structuring of the system in which it exists, the breath as the scan of that system, which is in the pranayama state, and therefore it is able to withdraw perception into its own, into that system's inner mechanics. It is able to comprehend that system. At that stage, it is able to give focus to a phenomenon, to comprehend the phenomenon. And that process of giving the focus or attention on to a phenomenon is called dhyana, dharana, and samadhi. Dhyana is, in a sense, dhyana and dharana are dynamic stages, while the samadhi is when the awareness is entirely identified with the process. It is almost like one with the process. It is understanding its mathematical movements entirely, feeling it able to repeat it. So it is one with that process. That is samadhi. Dhyana and dharana are in a more dynamic stage, where the awareness is applying itself to the process and beginning to understand it, beginning to feel it, and therefore entering a deeper perception, a direct perception of it, of its very inner dynamics, of its pure mathematical dynamics, finally. So the way of gaining information on a process and thus the understanding of imitating the process without outward action is samyama. And then the action is performed in what the Yoga Sutras label the Paramanu. Paramanu is the profoundest zeroth order zero that I'm speaking of. It has a mathematical inversion existing of the outward phenomenon. The awareness is able to gain access to the zeroth order zero set of vectors and act on those vectors and thereby affect reality. The awareness does not have to move into the operations on the world axis that usually occur. In the sense it doesn't have to engage the usual dynamics. That is the way I understand it as of now. So samyama is samyama is focus, alternating with dynamic focus and absorption on the process, endowing the awareness knowledge of the process and the ability to wield and repeat the process vectors spontaneously. When a process is understood, the awareness is able to repeat that code or that process to generate the same action without actually engaging the outward action. So the code in its flipped view, actually, in the 0 point flipping of it, inversion of it. So when they study the human brain, they find that human processes show patterns of repetition, like as if it were a code running. To be gained as per the Yoga Sutras. What the Yoga Sutras say. That is, the relationship between ether, space, and the body is to be understood. And then the when that is understood, in an aspect of it exists that process where the body is able to fly, which is described here as lagutula. Lagutula means lightweight, devoid of a sense of weight, weighed down by the world vector. So when that state is held in the samapati, that is in the samyama process, one gains the ability of flight, movement through space. I explore the Vyasa Bhasha of this particular statement also. Next slide. There are two aspects to it that gather my attention. One is the mention of the Paramanu, the 0.0, the profoundest mathematical sphere. So this is to be pondered there. That is what the Yoga Sutras say. And then it says it includes ability to move in the water. Water here can refer to the primordial waters too. Move with the race in the sense phenomenon evolution is associated with race or with either evolution that is in the sky as one places. The viharati is the word used for the movement. Ve is also the root of vector, vague movement. So it is able to hold higher order vector movement. And then there's interestingly the mention of axial fibers. Only by manipulation of those fibers. So again, it is the world system axis, which is again become in the human system. It becomes the spinal axis, spinal space. Perhaps that is a map with the navel chakra space. Chakra view is the vector view, in fact, of the spinning artifact and vector artifact. It's the same thing that is seen in an interpretative view as the nervous system. So, which is why the association with the spine is, you call the spine the spinal fibers actually. Those are the axial fibers. Whatever movement is actually happening when the human body moves, it is because of movement in the axial system, the spinal system. So in the inverse view, in the 0-point view, the 0-point manipulation of the system, one is able to gain access to the vector space that is beyond the space which is dealing with the body scan evolution. That is the DNA generated vector set, which is own body form. Its map can be held and the higher order space held within the zero, that is without any sense of outward movement. It's more like a soulward movement because it is in the profoundest zero. And comprehending how the movement maps, how the vector alteration maps, one is able to repeat it at will by the awareness to engage flight through space or to move from one position to another immediately when powers like that. So the same powers can engage in aspects of the same powers can engage in um, physical immortality, physical invincibility. For the vector set of own body is held by own awareness within the profoundest zero. There's no way any outward movement can destroy it. But the awareness is able to bring it forth into the outward reflection while it is entirely held in the innermost zero. And that movement is, in fact, seamlessly understood by the awareness. And the awareness needn't exit the 0 point actually to engage this that I say. That's the way I understand. I'll perhaps describe it in greater detail as my discovery of it deepens in a future lecture, perhaps. No, maybe. The no food/water needed superpower mentioned in the Yoga Sutras. Next slide. This is a very short talk. We'll discuss these two superpowers. That's all. We'll go to the next slide. The samyama process is done on the hollow that leads downward um, from the mouth, throat, downward to the stomach. That is the digestive organ, which is kanta kupe. It grants the ability to withdraw from food and water. So I tend to think of it more like understanding that very food transformation process. It's a process that is happening in reality. One can have a perception of it in terms of like the force of hunger transforming food, a fire transforming food, Agni transforming the vectors of food, the decomposition of the vectors generating those higher views, 60 views, and so forth, and the reconstruction of those views into what appear as the structuring mechanisms, proteins, and all those are happening inside. But that the feeling of that process can be gained too. Samyama can be engaged. The mathematical understanding of the process is gained too, and the samyama maintained there to understand the way the body transforms through the perception of those vectors. Ultimately, this is whether an individual is drinking water or eating food, those are just mathematical perceptions in the world system. So instead of gaining access to a mathematical perception through direct so-called outward action, like drinking water, one is coming in contact with the 8 cube. That's why the 8 geometry is there. Underlying the 8 cube occurs the possibility of scan of the 6 cube, which appears then in its 4D view as the human DNA and the DNA generated brain and so on. So of course the other dimensions are also involved. It leads down then to the 0 point. The 0 point has an inversion equality. So this very process can be done within the 0 point, which is why the ancient texts emphasize the zero structure, the shunyata so-called. So when within the 0 point this is imitated at will and entirely understood, the body gains the ability to go without food and water, so to speak, to engage that process within the 0 point and thereby have within its 0 point, a code, so to speak, that is generative of food, water, that is generative of higher order perceptions. That is generative of So it is essentially figure the process, find the code, find the 0 point inversion of the code, establish the code, and then the awareness has it established as a natural process. There is no fancy anything to do to gain access to that ability again.